Welcome, students, to Module 8, which covers prosimians, monkeys, and apes. We're talking about the largest groups of primates if we were to encapsulate all of them. It actually cross-mends two different types of classifications, and we'll discuss those. So this first audio lecture is going to cover the different schools of classification that are associated with organizing primates. And there are two main ones with the terminology associated with them. I'm also going to cover a number of ancestral mammalian traits that we need to, understand before we discuss primates, because primates are mammals, first and foremost. So we'll talk about some of those ancestral traits, as well as some derived primates traits, and then in this module, move into each one of these major groups of primates and learn about their ecology. The first classificatory scheme I want to share with you is known as evolutionary systematics. So you have here a chart that depicts all the living primates and all of the terminology that's associated with the major groups of primates that are studied. So at the top we have living primates, and then this scheme, which is known as evolutionary systematics, it's been around since about the time of Darwin. It includes prosimians and anthropoids. Typically, it refers to a simian is a shelf that is on the lower jaw or mandible. And pro is, as you know, a term that means before. So this would be before the simian shelf, and that would make anthropoids simians. But this term anthropoid was adopted and became more popular. And of course, we know anthropos means human because you're studying an anthropology class. And so oid means like. So these are more human-like ones that have the simian shelf. So prosimians and anthropoids. Oftentimes, when you look at this classificatory scheme, it really is where you classify the tarsier or tarsius, right smack dab in the middle. The tarsier has a number of different traits that make them associated with prosimians as well as anthropoids. And they're very small and they look like a number of other prosimians. And this classificatory scheme has been around since, I think, around the time of Darwin. And there's a more recent scheme because of probably a better classificatory method in science, which is known as cladistics. And that's kind of what we're going to more emphasize in this class. But you should know both of the classification schemes as well as the two main terminologies. So evolutionary systematics, prosimians, and anthropoids at least divides the two main groups of primates into that. Cladistic classification, where you lump groups into clades and you don't use things like grade, which looks at things like body size. That's an evolutionary systematics type of thinking. You can think of it this way, kind of, is you can think of you, a kangaroo, and a rat. You may say, oh, well, maybe I'm more closely related in time to the kangaroo because it has a larger body size than the rat. But actually, you're more closely related to a rat because they're a placental mammal, and a kangaroo is a marsupial, where the baby spends a lot of time in the pouch as to mature. So evolutionary systematics kind of takes into account of, well, body size, these kind of things. And when we actually began looking at a number of different traits on these primates, as well as this is also substantiated by genetic analysis, that we should divide them, living primates, into two major groups, strepsirrhines and haplorhines. Right? That's the cladistic classification. And I'll explain a little bit why this terminology is so, but a strepsirrhine typically is a creature that has a split upper lip and a wet nose. If you look at the last part of these words where it says rhini, that typically refers to have you ever heard of things like rhinoplasty, right? That's plastic surgery of the nose, kind of referring to the rhino's horn, but rhini usually refers to like the nasal aperture and that is the associated region. So strepsirini is actually having a split upper lip and a wet nose, and it's kind of all integrated together. You can look at a dog or cat, your pets, and see that they have a split upper lip and a wet nose that's integrated. Um, and some of the smallest primates, lemurs and lorises, have the same traits as other primitive mammals like dogs and cats. So they have retained this split upper lip and wet nose. Um, Haplorhines, that means fused upper lip. And also you can think of this as you move up this chart, um, that, you are a haplorhine. You have a fused upper lip, right? Your lip is not integrated to your nose, right? And this is something that we see with the tarsier, platyrrhines, which are New World monkeys, cercopithecoids, which are Old World monkeys, and hominoids, which are apes and us. Right? We'll go through each one of these major groups as we move along, and we'll understand not just how they are related to each other, but all of the features of their behavior that have allowed them to adapt to specific environments. Well, how do you read some of these charts? So what we're going to do is we have a chart of the living primates, and this chart is extremely accurate. It's as accurate as we can be in terms of classifying living primates. So we're really good at this. So this chart it has been designed based on traits and genetics, right? Looking at both phenotypes and genotypes. That's why we learned about things like inheritance and those mechanisms. So what we can do is we can go through this chart and find out and locate when specific traits have evolved through time, as well as on different branches of the tree. So when you look at a tree like this, right, and we're looking at kind of like the purple branches and everything, and on the end of those branches you have things like non-primate mammals, lemuroids, lorisoids, tarsiers, platyrrhines, cercopithecoids, and hominoids. As to the left of the chart would be older in time, not just you know different types of organisms with specific traits that are some more complex and more primitive than others, or more derived meaning more recent. Further to the left would be organisms that evolved older in time in the past, and then to the right would be organisms that evolved more recent in time. If you look at primates on Earth, we are the one on Earth that evolved in the most recent amount of time. The Homo sapiens lineage, our lineage, we think only goes back at its oldest, probably about 300,000 years. Whereas if you look at some of the antiquity of some of the animals on this chart, you're talking about tens of millions of years. So there are a number of different ancestral mammalian traits, and I'm going to go through some of the most important ones. So here is a list of them. And so how do you read a chart like this? You see the red tick mark here on the left in the base of the tree. That would mean that every organism has all of these ancestral mammalian traits unless something has changed. So you kind of put this red tick mark on the purple tree, and then the paint kind of goes up the tree, right? Unless something has changed. And then if there are tick marks that are separated on a separate branch of the tree, that would mean only those organisms have those traits. Hopefully this makes a little more sense as we go along. Refer back to this audio lecture if we're moving in and out of the tree and you can't quite remember how to read these charts, or send me a message if you're like, I don't quite understand how this works. Um, I'll help explain it to you. But let's go over what a post-orbital bar is. So a post-orbital bar is a piece of skeletal tissue that connects both the frontal bone and the zygomatic bone. So this would be like kind of the bone that makes up the top of your eye orbits and the bone that makes up parts of your cheek. Some organisms do not have an actual bone that connects that area to the outside of your eye orbit. So for example, on this Tasmanian wolf, it does not have a postorbital bar. You could see depicted at the arrow, there is no bone that connects the top of the skull, right, to the side of the cheek. It is not there. So effectively, other ancestral mammals, yes, like your dog, like your cat, they don't have the postorbital bar either. So you can actually poke their eye out from the back and the side if you can make it through all that tissue. I wouldn't suggest doing that. But it is not present, right? It's just something that we do not see, right? We do not see a postorbital bar in ancestral mammals. Now, when you get to primates, primates evolved a postorbital bar, as well as maybe some other creatures like deer and sheep. A really consistent ancestral mammalian trait is 5 digits, and typically claws. But you can see that claws have, they've been replaced by nails, right? You have nails. Most other primates have nails. Some have claws. But nails are important for grasping. Right? So you have developed nails. That would be a derived trait for primates. But ancestral mammals have claws as well as digits. Now think about this. Not only do ancestral mammals have 5 digits on each one of their appendages, so do you. So this means that something that has evolved 50, 60 million years ago, we think, has been retained in all of its descendants, including you, the most recent primate to evolve on Earth. So yes, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers and toes on each one of your terminal appendages, and this can be readily demonstrated throughout mammals. Here you go. Here are some ancestral mammalian traits, and of course, it's been retained in all living primates and us. The black bear, for instance, you can look at a black bear's paw. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can count. You can look at the paw of a domesticated cat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 digits with claws, right? Now there are some exceptions, as always there can be. For instance, horses. Early horses that we have in fossil horses, they actually have 5 toes, and then we see younger horses through time begin to lose the toes until they completely have lost all their toes, and matter of fact evolved this exterior hoof. And here's the interesting thing. This is probably because of likely domestication of horses, but horses actually only have 1 digit now because of this. They have lost all of their toes, and so horses literally are walking on their fingers. Other ancestral mammals that are not primates can be described as having both divergent eye orbits as well as a small brain. Divergent eye orbits meaning those eye orbits that are pointed to the sides, they don't have overlapping planes of view. And this can be seen readily in other ancestral mammals. Here we have a rabbit and armadillo with their skulls. Look at them. You can see that their eyes are pointed to the sides, both, with the fleshy bits on as well as the skeletal tissue exclusively. Look at even the armadillo. The armadillo's eye orbits are so incredibly divergent, and this is likely because these animals need to be able to see better peripherally to the sides and even behind themselves. And an armadillo needs to have his or her eyes even further divergent so that it can see around its shell a little bit behind itself, because that can kind of get in the way of vision. These animals typically do not have overlapping planes of view. That means that if you stood to the side, in peripheral view of a rabbit, the rabbit can only see you with one eye unless it turns its head. Once it turns its head, that rabbit actually sees two of you because their eyes don't overlap. And these animals, they actually sacrifice a lot in things like depth perception, because if you have eye orbits that are pointing to the front or forward or convergent eye orbits, that means that you have stereoscopic vision and you have overlapping planes of view, and you can better sense the distance between you and other objects. These animals cannot necessarily do that to a very good degree because they have double vision if they're looking straight on. That's why you might see many of these animals actually turn to the side, right? You can see rabbits do it all the time on many hikes and walks that I do, walking along, and the rabbit it scurries and turns to its side so it can see you with one of those eyes. And that helps them with depth perception because it's only one eye that they're using to see you, and they don't have double vision. It's important to have divergent eye orbits so you can see to the side and maybe behind you, and you sacrifice a little bit of depth perception in order for them to do that. Strepsirini and having a longer snout are ancestral mammalian traits. Now, some of them have persisted in, primate descendants. So Strepsirini is also the name of some of the most primitive primates. And this is because they have retained this. Now, of course, once you get to the tarsier, monkeys and us and the apes, you're talking about haplorhines that have a fused upper lip. So let's look at some examples of Strepsirini in ancestral mammals. Strepsirini is an ancestral mammalian feature, and it's also retained in some of the most primitive primates like lemurs and lorises. Strepsirini is defined by a split upper lip and a wet nose. You can see an example of a feline. You can see the dog in the upper right corner. You can see a gerbil or a hamster here nibbling on a carrot. You easily seen that you have a wet nose, you have a split upper lip, and you generally have vibrissae or whiskers. Having a wet nose is very advantageous because this allows many of these animals to have a profound sense of smell. Another great trait to discuss and bring up, because you can easily see it in ancestral mammals like your dog or your cat, is the presence of a tapetum lucidum. A tapetum lucidum is an area behind the eye orbit that is like a reflective layer that allows light to bounce back on the lens. And you can see this when you shine light on your dog or your cat. And you can see that their eyes light up, right? That's because you are shining light into the back of their eye, and what you're seeing is the tapetum lucidum reflect back. Now, what this does is it allows many ancestral mammals to see in low light and be able to see better at times like dawn and dusk as well. Now, if you shine a light on them, yeah, you're kind of blinding them. They can't really see. Uh, it's just you being able to shine enough light to visibly see that reflective layer in the back of their eye. Here is a slide showing you the morphology of the tapetum lucidum in a diagram. Here's a lateral view of the eye in cross section that shows the behind the retina, the tapetum lucidum layer, and reflecting back to the lens so that you can try and pick up as much as light as possible in low light scenarios. You can see here an image on the left, lower left of a cat with the line, direct light shining with the tapetum lucidum reflecting back. And in the lower right, this is actually a dissection of a cow eye. Many times, even in human dissections, the eye is just very challenging to dissect, and it's very frail. You can usually get bigger eyes from a cow, and you can see the same stuff. And you could also get to see the tapetum lucidum. You peel back the retina, which has been done in this image, and you can see that nice reflective layer of the tapetum lucidum that's in blue. Let's begin to talk about derived primate traits. These derived traits are ones that are these are ones that are more recent in time, as well as they are shared traits that have changed when you look at in comparison to non-primate mammals. So we are concerned whether it's shared ancestral, right? Meaning that it's been inherited from ancestors, or is it something like shared derived, where it is changed through common ancestry? And here is a list of derived primate traits that can typify the lineage. Now, of course, as you move up the family tree, some of these some of these traits may have changed because they can be derived, they can be ancestral, and they can be derived and changed in some of their other lineages, like New World monkeys, Old World monkeys, so on and so forth. So derived primate traits, typically grasping extremities, having a divergent hallux. This is a big toe that is used for grasping, right? That's not in line with the other toes, right? Our toe in humans is non-divergent. It's convergent with the other toes, and that's because we've adapted to walking on two legs. And there's typically a nail on this big toe. Some of the more primitive primates, like lemurs and lorises, and even tarsier, will have some claws. And to be a primate, you need to have convergent eye orbits. All primates do. All primates have convergent eye orbits. And you might see some other ancestral mammals have it. Like, for instance, a cat. Other felines have convergent eye orbits. A bear, like a black bear, has convergent eye orbits. That's because they are animals that are predators, and they need to have stereoscopic vision and convergent eye orbits and able to hunt other organisms that have divergent eye orbits. And they need to have this type of advantage. So we do see convergent eye orbits evolve in other separate individual ancestral mammalian lineages, but all primates have convergent eye orbits as well as a postorbital bar. Right? All primates have a postorbital bar. Again, you can see some of the exceptions. There are some lineages where, for instance, sheep or deer actually have evolved a postorbital bar, but they have divergent eye orbits. So that's how you can differentiate them. They have a longer snout and a number of other things when you look at their physical characteristics. But if you have a postorbital bar and convergent eye orbits, you can probably bet your life savings that you're looking at a primate. and this is how we find them in the fossil record. You can go to a place like the Bighorn Basin here in Wyoming, and nice, beautiful clay deposits, and you can start digging through and finding fossils, and you literally can just take every skull and say, no post-over bar, no post-over bar, no post-over bar. Ooh, this one has a post-over bar. Does it have convergent eye orbits? Yes. That's a primate. And they do. They regularly find primates like lemurs, as well as the tarsier, right? That are related to these modern organisms, even in the Americas, but 50 million years ago. So let's look at some of these features. Here are some of the grasping extremities. So you look at the thumb on these creatures. They have opposable thumbs, and they have opposable big toes. Right. So grasping extremities both on the forelimb and the hind limb. Primates typically have an enlarged brain, much bigger in comparison to their body size. When you look at primates in general, in comparison to other non-primate mammals, other ancestral mammals, something we've already talked about, previous slide, primates have convergent eye orbits, and we also see a reduced snout. So you can see this loris right here looking you straight on with convergent eye orbits. You can see it in the skeleton to the right, and you can also notice that these creatures have a postorbital bar. They have a little bony piece that connects the top of the forehead to the side of the cheekbone. So this is something different. Remember the example I gave you were dogs and cats, and the Tasmanian wolf does not have a postorbital bar. And you can refer back to that slide to see that it is not present. Here, in the area around that yellow arrow, you can see the connection of those two bones and a nice postorbital bar.